Hey there, we are a Code Labs intern team, and we have spent the last 4 weeks building a word tracking app with the help and support of our mentor, Jason Panzer. Let's meet the intern team. I am Melanie Locke. I worked on the front end and design of our application along with Tori Murray, and Clark Ngo is our back end engineer. So we were inspired by the word tracking capabilities of NaNoWriMo, which stands for National Novel Writing Month. They are a nonprofit that hosts annual internet-based writing projects where participants write 50,000 words in the month of November. This has been happening since 1999, and in 2014, over 400,000 writers participated in the nonprofit's events. Our internship team shares a passion for writing in a few different forms, and I actually participated in NaNoWriMo in 2016 and 2017. Let me take you over to our app and I'll show you what we've built. So we wanted to take that word tracking functionality and incorporate it into an application that is very easy to use and is very responsive. And it provides a place for writers to keep track of various projects as well as their progress within each of those projects, and just as an encouragement to help them meet their writing goals. Our whole application is open source. We wanted it to be something that anyone could use without needing any kind of subscription or payment, particularly since this idea was hatched by our mentor Jason Panzer, along with his wife, who works with a nonprofit based out of Seattle called the Bureau of Fearless Ideas. They host writing groups for kids to help them build their storytelling skills and just continue to build a community. And so we were thinking with this application of how would a student in a similar writing group in an educational setting be using this. We wanted to make it super easy to use. All your projects are laid out right in front of you. You can see exactly how far you've done on each of them. Adding a new project is very easy with a project name, a description, adding a word goal, as well as a word count. And then each project can be viewed as well with the total words submitted, your word count goal, and then your progress towards that goal, so that students and writers could really easily track how they're doing on each of their various writing projects. I'm going to pass it over to Clark, and he's going to talk a little bit more about how we got started building this application.
Hello, my name is Clark and I'll be talking about the tools that we use. For the technology stack, we use the MERN stack, which MongoDB, Express, React, and Node. It's a modern web application with a lot of community support and super simple to deploy. For TypeScript, we did consider it, but to not overcomplicate our world, we went with just plain old JavaScript. For Material UI, we use this to have our components for faster and easier web development, and instead of doing it by scratch with vanilla CSS. We used Auth0 for authentication, for federated identity to handle our user credentials, and to not worry about that security part. For the other tools, we have Zoom, where we collaborated for twice a week and one-on-ones with our mentor Jason. We use Slack as well for our persistent chat communications, daily stand up, and updating with pull requests, quick communications. We use GitHub for our code repository, and we protected our branches so that we won't just be pushing code directly and enforce a code review. For Notion, we use it for documentation notes, API design, and minutes. For Figma, we've used it for collaborative designs with our wireframing and our sketches. Last but not the least, we used Postman to do API testing for requesting resources in our application.
Hi, I'm Tori. On the design side, we started with a paper wireframe from our mentor Jason. His one sketch turned into an MVP's worth of paper wireframes on my end, which we then translated into Figma, a collaborative design workspace. While creating Figma designs, we worked to align our paper wireframes with components and styles included in Material UI, a material design React framework. Once we had the Material UI MVP in front of us, it was easy to see user experience flows and patterns to help mock up a prototype. A working prototype allowed us to see the routes and endpoints we needed, and we designed a RESTful API.
With the help from my team members, I was able to build the back-end routes with them giving me an API design in Notion. And as you can see, they built me a get request route, post, put, and delete. With this API design, I would know how to create the request to the resource. We start with importing modules such as .env to deal with our environment variables, Express for our Express application, body parser for parsing JSON, Mongoose for our MongoDB driver, and these three for dealing with JSON Web Token. The next part you would see is basically importing the controllers from the controllers folders, which we have projects and sign in, sign up from the users folder inside the controllers. We do have a section for our database connection, a section for dealing with JSON Web Token to authenticate, and the middleware, which includes the body parser and headers that we would allow and origins that we would allow as well. Now we go into our routes, and we do have protected routes with our get projects resource, get one project resource, post one project, update one project, and delete a project, right? We also have login routes for sign up and sign in, and this is just serving our server. Okay, so well, let's look at an example with getting one project. We go to the fetch project controller, and in this controller, it will basically run a function, and that function would now give back either a 404 request not found, 500 internal server error, or 200 if it successfully queried the project. When we go inside this fetch project, this is now lives in our models, and we start with connecting to the MongoDB using Mongoose, and we build a schema which has different properties for validation, the data types, string or numbers, required if the field is required or not. Then we'll create the model for that project and point that to the project's collection. And in our example, we basically created this fetch project function that passes in an ID parameter and use that parameter to basically do a project.find query with the field ID and the value ID. To highlight, we have our controllers folder, models folder to abstract it from our app.js. And once the route becomes bigger, we'll also abstract this to the routes folder so that we can have decoupling and easier maintenance. Let's now request a single project resource using a project ID. We added the bearer token and hit send. As you can see, the JSON Web Token has expired. We also got a 401 status code unauthorized. So let's grab a new token. Let's add the new token grab from auth0, hit send, and as you can see, I get a status 200 success, and I grab the JSON.
Some of the larger tasks I took on in the front end were the API handler, implementing auth0, and managing our client architecture. The API handler, our utility file, was created to deal with handling requests so our code stayed clean and dry. Each call to our API is listed here and is exported as a method. Different calls have different parameters, all requiring a token, which is used in the request config function to create headers for each request. I wrote ample documentation for the team to use when interacting with the API, and here's an example of how it cleans our code up right here, where there is a simple one-line request to get a response for one project. The token passed in through that method is brought to us by the implementation of auth0. Auth0 gave us this provider that wraps around the entire React project. It provides us with things like our tokens, as well as the external login page to handle sign-in and sign-up that you may have noticed in our demo. The provider can be called in any functional component to do things like get the current user email, or request a new job. Adding authentication like this changed a few things with our app architecture. With the provider now giving us these new tools, we had to restructure the app to handle auth. Our routes.js file, which was implemented using React Router, now checks the auth0 provider method is authenticated to check if a user is logged in before rendering. If true and the user is authenticated, the user will see the page they requested, such as the Show Projects page. If not, they will be logged out of the application and moved to the unauthenticated homepage component. Now I'll pass things off to Melanie to talk more about our components.
As we started building the view pages for this application, we knew that there would be a few components that we would be using pretty often. One of those was the project card components, as well as the grid components that those project cards would be living in. So we decided to utilize a front-end framework to make that process a little bit simpler and to utilize some of the functionality of a framework. We went with Material UI specifically for its responsivity and its mobile-first design, which was very important to us in creating this application. And we also wanted to utilize some of the built-in style and functionality of Material UI's card and grid components. As we got started with Material UI, we pretty quickly ran into some blockers just with the learning curve of utilizing a new framework, and that was hard at times, but we were able to overcome those with a lot of collaboration and learning from each other's styling and implementation successes so that we could really utilize Material UI to really quickly get our views up and start having different components that our user could interact with. We also utilized React hook form within our new project modal. That's that pop-up screen that allows a user to easily add a new project. React hook form allowed us to use their validation and gather that data from the project modal so we could really easily pass it over to the database. And we had to implement React hook form with Material UI to be able to do that. And some of the styling with Material UI wasn't a perfect match for what our wireframes had originally set out to accomplish, but we decided to adapt and use some of that built-in functionality of Material UI and of React hook form rather than creating just unnecessary extra styling for us to perfectly match those wireframes, and instead just work with this great framework that we had to create something that was very user-friendly and easy for our writers to be creating their projects and tracking their progress. Within these 4 weeks, we've managed to accomplish a lot, but this is an open source project that we're all hoping to contribute with into the future, and hopefully it's something that our users can get a lot of great use out of as we continue to build out that functionality. I'll hand it back over to Tori. She'll wrap things up and talk a little bit more about the future of our application.
The future of our app is limitless. With plans for everyone on the team to continue efforts on this project, we'll move to open source the application. Personally, I am excited to continue my extended internship over the next 2 months as I work to earn college credit for my contributions. Here's what major features we're planning on adding. We'd like to update the UI and UX for a better experience more targeted toward the audience, and expand beyond Material UI styling. We'd like to add the ability to add chapters to a project through a text editor, so users no longer have to manually update their word count. And finally, we'd like to add the ability for a group leader to manage a group of users, so a potential teacher could register their students and track their classroom's progress toward their goals. Overall, we're so proud of what we've accomplished in 1 month, and we're really looking forward to continuing to put work into it. Thank you for your time and for listening to our Tech Talk. Here's where you can find us and our project online.